Hello and welcome to Darkling-studios. I am the Darkling. What happens if you take a generic fantasy story, set in the same base story that basically every isekai has followed for the better part of a decade, and you take the usual trope of a thousand-year-old girl that is usually used to justify lollies in anime, and make the whole thing about what she does after the main mission is done, grappling with her regrets and trying to understand those she has left behind? Well, you would have the story of Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. I alluded to this already, but Frieren is a very old elf girl. She wears generic fantasy robes and uses a staff. Her appearance is simple and easy to read. It's just recognizable enough that the old statues of her still give her away. She's been honing her craft for magic for centuries, and she's been set in her ways and has nothing to really look forward to or do now that the big objective of defeating the Demon King is done. Her new goal is to collect any and all magic she can because her friends in the hero's party loved her spells. Really, it's like she was grinding for the main story her entire life, and the aftermath is just her doing all the side jobs. Fern is another of the main troupe. She joins the party as a child, who is especially adept at controlling her magic, and joins Frieren. But for a slow life like an elf like Frieren, Fern finds herself wasting months, if not years of her, albeit short life, on whims and trivial quests. This is, of course, frustrating to her, as it should be to anyone in her situation. But she has had a profound effect on Frieren. Her similarities to Frieren has influenced her a lot, actually. In fact, she has made the elf who has lived for so long that nothing matters start to consider Fern's time and its short duration, pushing her to go faster and stop obsessing over the little things, which is a feat considering Frieren's usual stubbornness. The last of our main trio is Stark. His character is something we have seen a lot, actually. A cowardly but hyper-powerful man who tries to avoid danger, but knows he needs to protect others. Think of Zenitsu from Demon Slayer. His whole thing is the axe, and his ability to melt rocks by hitting them real hard, which, in all honesty, should scale him above basically everyone. His master is one of the hero's party, and even he says his power is outrageous, to the point where he hit him on reflex just because he thought he was going to die. And he is a little one note with that afraid to fight thing. Sure, he pushes past that when he actually does fight, but I feel his character is a bit underdeveloped when compared to his companions. For the plot, I'm not going to be going over the entire plot of the show, because, frankly, I want you to watch it. But I guess I will go over the first episode and give my thoughts on it. So here we go. Episode 1, The Journey's End. The anime starts at the end. Many stories do, but the difference here is the story continues on after the end of the mission. Where a party of adventurers cross the land to defeat a demon king, it's a simple mission, but one that has become so common it's being taken as a template of hundreds of shows and movies. Isekai in particular has run with the concept, and I would say 8 out of 10 isekai follow along with the concept and tweak it in subtle but meaningful ways, just as this show does. After some lively banter about what jobs they'll all get now that their life-defining mission is complete, the hero looks to Frieren and comments on how she is going to outlive the whole party. They are defining the tropes and the core message of the show early, so they can build on the idea as time moves forward. There's a hint of melancholy as they talk about it as well. A trope that defines the core of the show, really. It's more subtle later on, and they make sure to place a great importance on the idea early. They arrive at the castle town to parties and rewards, and they spend some of their time reminiscing on the adventures they just finished. It has an air of a group of close friends telling tales of, like D&D campaigns they had together. It's easy to tell they all had fun and got close. The generic fantasy tropes pop up again and again. It feels like a generic D&D campaign, but one the whole group loved to be a part of. A meteor shower begins overhead, and Frieren, being an elf and already older than the rest, knows the shower would look better from a different vantage point, and says they should see it again in 50 years. The heroes agree to the idea, but 50 years from now is a ridiculous amount of time for someone who lives as long as humans do, so he giggles at it. It's already clear her perspective of time is muddled when she says they were together for a mere decade, but I suppose for someone who lives as long as her, that's the equivalent of just spending a day with a group of friends. So she leaves. The years rolling by, decades pass, and now it's almost time for the meteor shower again. She returns to the city to find everything a bit changed, and most of all, her old companions are now old. The horn she left on a whim turned into something of great importance to her old friend, and became something of constant worry to him. She thinks it's nothing too important, as it was just a simple ingredient for a summoning, and can't appreciate why he went through all the effort. This is an important moment, though, even though it's short. It gives Frieren a small insight into the mind of man, and makes her start to think about how people who live short lives would. So they set off on one last adventure together, arriving at the place where the meteor shower is able to be seen better, and then the hero dies. Frieren, for possibly the first time in her life, looks back on her time with the party and realizes she coasted through their time together, and she wasn't in the moment and not fully engaged, and she cries, realizing the hero who loved and respected her, who spent his days remembering her and died happy just because she was there, was someone she barely knew. It's a hard scene to watch, and honestly, for being only 17 minutes into a series, it hits as hard as the climax of some shows, and it was an excellently written moment. The whole experience seemed to shift her perspective forever. Before, she just wanted to expand her repertoire of spells and to discover new ways to use them. A purely selfish goal. But now, as she leaves once more, she wants something different. She wants to learn more about humans, and I believe this is still a very selfish goal, but it's in line for her character. Because she wants to know the mind of her friend better. The hero she regrets leaving behind and not getting to know. After a few more years of wondering, she came back to leave liquor at the grave of her friend, and finds he's still alive, and now a properly old man. And in his care is a young orphan girl. He asks her to take her on as an apprentice, but Frieren refuses. Then he asks another question. He wants her to decipher a spellbook, and it's said to have lost spells. He says he wishes for more time, the spellbook potentially containing a spell for immortality. But the way he says it definitely gives off the air of a request that was simply to bide his time. He wanted to convince Frieren to stay and teach the orphan girl magic, so that she's up to snuff when he eventually dies, so that she won't be alone and Frieren will take her with her. That concludes episode 1. Hopefully this small exploration for part of the series gives you an idea of how the show is and what to expect. And I'm going to go a little more in depth on aspects I like about the show and give you my thoughts. The world building of Frieren Beyond Journey's End is honestly more plain than you would expect. The characters they meet, the places they go, the stories they tell, they're all very generic. Other fantasy not only did it first, they often did it better, in one way or another. But that's not to say there isn't a charm to the show. That's all its own, really. Sure, dragons have existed for decades, and always have a hoard of treasure, but to have it smart enough to recognize his Stark strength, and flee even when Stark himself is unsure, that interaction is unexpected and special. When the all-powerful demon that could kill anyone, and when the hero's party themselves had to seal him away, he returns only to find his life's work being wielded by and surpassed by basically every mage of the day. That interaction itself is unique and different enough to make it a compelling and interesting story. There's nothing new, but the application of all these elements is creative and interesting, and ultimately enhance the experience of watching the show. Many people I've talked to, many threads I've read, all agree. They think the show is outstanding in its visual aspects. Well, for the most part, I disagree. I think the style of the show is good, but it's nothing special. You can tell a lot of work has been put in, but I've just seen too many outstanding shows, and this one is kind of middling. The visual design of the spell circles is serviceable, but the magic itself is weak. The strange particle effects and the blobby nature of the spells, it just doesn't look good. The visual designs of the building and bystanders leave a lot to be desired, and are just stylized enough to not be ugly, but the only place where the art shines, pun intended, is the lighting effects and the plant life. That made the flower and grasses look great, which as an artist myself, it's something I struggle with. So to see it so well done does make me a little jealous. The main cast themselves are all wearing pretty simple clothes. I'm sure it's a bleed over from the manga artist trying to make a simple character to draw thousands of times, but they're well made and do a good job of presenting their personalities through visual storytelling. The designs of many of the beasts they fight are pretty good, but the demons, it feels lazy. Just humans with horns. I feel like there's many things they could do to show off a demonic nature, so just adding horns is quick and easy, but I feel it's lacking in any real creativity. Which is sad, seeing as the demons are supposed to be the main enemy. The ones that have the most impact on the story being the very reason Frieren herself is on her mission. I understand there's a bit of play with the idea that demons are human-like, so humans will let their guard down, but justifying poor design with a small nod in the story doesn't really feel like something that is worth giving a pass. I feel like their potential as an intimidating villain was ended there, when they force all the characterization of their personality on their actions alone. And personally, I feel like it wasn't enough. I know I just spent a few minutes telling you that everything was generic and ugly and disappointing, but let me contradict myself. The animation itself is great. The movement is clean and well done, and you can tell a lot of love was put in from Studio Madhouse. They have made hundreds of amazing anime at this point, and this is no different. The most outstanding parts has to be the fight against the dragon and the fight against the demons. Stark's jumps and swings have a weighty impact and make it easy to believe that he's really fighting a dragon. And Fern's all-out assault against her demon was a spectacle. Sure, it's the usual beams flying in, but the panning and establishing shots create an air of gravitas, especially for people that are just fighting on ramparts. And this show really does know its explosions, which is always nice to see. Frieren's fight against Aura was a delight. The way she casually weaves between strikes and then Aura decapitating herself. There isn't many moments where this show shines more than that. The animation team all deserve a raise, but knowing Japanese work ethic and culture, it probably ain't gonna happen. I know music is something that a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into, and without it the show would suffer a lot. But I've never been one to focus on music for a show. But Frieren has an outstanding soundtrack, and while you're watching, you don't really notice it's there, but it flavors the whole experience in such a great way. It's subtle, but I think that's what a soundtrack should be. In The Lord of the Rings, one of the most important depictions of elves in the modern usage of the race, elves were alive since just about the beginning. Their immortal forms lived forever, and when they died, they could be given flesh again and return to Middle-earth. But during their time away from the land of Arda, interacting with those that were mortal, and in a world that changed nonstop, they were prone to diminishing, a sort of depression that the mind simply couldn't contend with the nature of a world that was constantly changing. Seeing nations rise and fall in a never-ending loop of life and death attacks the fundamental nature of an immortal mind. Many stories attempt to overcome this, but most of them fail pretty spectacularly. I see Frieren as a Tolkien-esque elf, one who lives a great deal of time but is pulled into the thinking of shorter-lived creatures, with the immortal mind wasn't really built to comprehend. And I believe the story, as it progresses, is going to challenge her ability to cope with the feelings and experiences she has with all those who died. Frieren herself is a complicated character, and honestly, I can't wait to see what they do next. It's a pretty good show, all things considered. I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10. Highly recommend. Go watch it. Goodbye.